Alright, let's just finish World War II up, sitting here in the rocking chair by the fireplace early in the morning, picking on the banjo. When we left off, the Americans invaded D-Day. We had created a two-front war, which has forced Hitler to divide his forces more. And if we really look at the map on the whiteboard there, we've actually put Hitler in a three-front war in World War II. There was that failed Italian front going on before D-Day happened. We had jumped from Sicily into Italy and got stalled at Rome, and we just couldn't make any progress because of the mountains and the fierce German defenses. So we shifted to create a two-front war at D-Day by invading France and making our way to Paris, while the Russians are pushing the Germans out of Russia. All that means that Hitler had to weaken his defenses in Italy to help beef up against America and France and the Russians over here. He's splitting his army three ways now, which is going to weaken all three areas. So he's really trapped in a three-front war, which is one front better than a two-front war. And so at this point, Hitler is just doomed to lose World War II, and he knows it. But Hitler is not the kind of guy to just give up. He comes up with one last plan, one last punch. The Alps will be quite the obstacle for the Americans to cross here. That's going to take time. Russia is such an expanse. If Hitler just had more time, he believes he could deal with Russia. But Russia takes a lot of time. The one thing that he can do quickly that might save the war for him would be to hit this American line. After Paris, we were bulldozing across France. We got Bradley in the north, and we've literally unleashed Patton in the south with a brand new army of 300,000 guys, and they're creating a bulldozer line just plowing across France. This is Patton at his finest. His tanks are moving so fast. He is unleashed to do what he is meant to do, to kill, 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 kill. His tanks are moving faster than Eisenhower can supply him with fuel. He is so efficiently just killing Germans across southern France. But Hitler realizes D-Day took us a year to plan and a year to pull off. If he could take the best of his soldiers from Italy and the best of his soldiers from Russia, his best soldiers, his best tanks, the last supplies of gasoline he has, and if he could hit us just right, if he could nail us in the middle of this bulldozer line and break us in half, he could potentially knock Bradley's half back into the ocean and knock Patton's half senseless after that and ruin everything it took us a year to achieve at D-Day. Now, this is a pretty slim chance, and he knows it. But the advantage is, if he can make this work, would Americans have the fortitude to plan another D-Day invasion, to gather up millions of more soldiers, equip them, spend the money, train them, and commit to fighting Hitler for another year? Or would Americans back down and say, hey, it wasn't even Hitler that bombed Pearl Harbor. It was the Japanese. Americans were still pretty salty about this Japanese thing. We have yet to really focus on the Japanese in this war, who bombed us. So Hitler's hope is, if he could knock us out of the war, then he could focus everything he has on the Russians and pull off still what he considered to be the mother of all battles, as he had been planning for years. Now, to do this, if you remember back to World War I, something should look familiar about this map. Right here, in the middle, we have the magic Christmas tree forest, right there. Better known, actually, as the Ardennes. That is right in the middle of our line. It would be very difficult for Americans to move soldiers through the magic Christmas tree forest. And conversely, it's the last place we would expect Hitler to be moving soldiers. And so we're going to have to sweep around that magic Christmas tree forest, which weakens the center of our lines, giving Hitler the golden opportunity of, if he could gather his forces, concentrate them behind the magic Christmas tree forest, and then hit us in the center of our line as we pass weakly through the magic Christmas tree forest, he has a chance of pulling off this miracle that becomes known as the Battle of the Bulge. As our line advances up through here, we'll be weak in the magic Christmas tree forest. And there's a town, I'm not really placing it right, we're going to put it there, but it's more in the forest, called Bastogne, right there. And Hitler realizes Bastogne is the key, because it has railroads coming out of it. The Chattanooga of World War II. If he can capture the town of Bastogne, he could funnel in reinforcements, ammunition, fuel, more guns, more soldiers through that railroad network. The key to the whole thing is right in the middle at the town of Bastogne. So he hits us just before Christmas of 1944. He nails us with everything he has right in the center of the magic Christmas tree forest. He hits us hard, and it causes our line to bend like this, which is why it's called the Battle of the Bulge. Guys were fleeing this line, and Bastogne would be sort of in the bulge right there. Whole units of Americans were surrendering, guys are fleeing the battle, and Eisenhower goes into complete meltdown mode. A lot of Americans had presumed at this point the war was over. It was just a race to Berlin. Hitler had nothing left, and bam, he hits us enough to bulge our line like that. So he calls together all of his leading generals, Bradley, Patton, the whole crew are sitting together in a meeting room. This is a way more fun story to tell in class. Eisenhower was a smoker. Everybody was a smoker. It's the 1940s. Eisenhower's about a 3 or 4 pack a day guy. He was hitting it 5 or 6 packs a day during this literally just chain smoking. His heart rate's up, nicotine's speed. He's extraordinarily stressed out. If that line breaks, we potentially lose World War II. And so Eisenhower is just incredibly stressed out. And so he looks around and he realizes, I gotta get somebody to get to Bastogne, because if Hitler gets Bastogne and funnels reinforcements through Bastogne, the game is up. And so he chooses a group that I wish we could spend more time talking about, but we're under extreme circumstances. The paratroopers from D-Day. The 101st Airborne in particular went through that training I described in the last video. They parachuted into Normandy behind the German lines on June 6th of 1944. They then fight for the next 6 weeks all the way to Paris, which would put us into mid-July 1944. Then somebody got the bright idea they should jump into Belgium and help free our friends, the Belgians, from German occupation. So they spent July, August, September 1944, dropped into Belgium in Operation Market Garden. It was a complete and utter disaster and a waste of lives. And they've been in constant combat now from June through October of 1944. They start shipping them out in about November of 1944. And the idea is, by that point, these guys have been in almost 6 months of straight combat, and that's extreme. And so somebody gets a brighter idea. We'll send the 101st back to Paris to get some rest and relaxation. just about the time they kick their boots off, the Bulge happens just before Christmas of 1944. Eisenhower's looking around and realizes, holy crap, if we lose Bastogne, the game is up. We lose the war. I need somebody that can get to Bastogne in a hurry and just hold it at all cost. And so the 101st is ordered to Bastogne. No time to jump. They're just going to get on trucks and go to Bastogne. No time to grab gear. Some of them didn't have coats. Some of them didn't have ammunition. They just jumped on trucks and raced to Bastogne. And as our line bulges out, as I've drawn on the map, they got to go through that bulge. And they were literally grabbing guns and ammunition, cigarettes, food, first aid supplies, helmets, and boots in some cases from guys fleeing the battle. And they make their way to Bastogne. This, you can't really draw this on a map. Oh, this is happening at the same time. As this bulges out, the 101st gets to Bastogne and surrounds it with their 10,000 paratroopers. And the Germans go right by them, and so as the Bulge develops, the 101st Airborne are totally surrounded at Bastogne. And this leads to just one of the most glorious and famous military episodes in American history. As most of the American army there was fleeing, the 101st surround Bastogne, dig foxholes in the woods around Bastogne. You know, a foxhole is a two-man hole. They're digging, it's right before Christmas. They're digging in frozen ground. It's snowing. They're in the woods. And for the next solid month, they're going to live in foxholes, surrounded by the Germans, getting shot at, because the Germans really, really want this town. And the 101st just suffers and suffers and suffers, but their orders are to hold that town at all costs. If we lose Bastogne, we lose the war. If that bulge breaks, we lose the war. And that bulge will break if Hitler can use Bastogne to bring in those reinforcements and supplies and resources. So this is incredibly important for the war. The 101st guys, they were suffering. Can you imagine living in a hole in the ground through December and January? They were freezing to death. You couldn't light a fire because the German snipers could target you from the fire. You couldn't smoke a cigarette because every time you puffed on your cigarette, at night the end of the cigarette lights up and a sniper knows if I aim for the cherry of that cigarette, I hit some guy in the face. So they were just living in miserable conditions, dying by the hundreds. It's frozen ground. They couldn't bury their dead. They had to stack them like firewood. Guys were getting so frostbitten that their feet would be so frozen that their feet would die in their boots and break off in their boot. It's just that extreme, horrifying of conditions, and yet they refused to surrender. The German command sends in a note to the 101st commander, which was Anthony McAuliffe at that time. The real commander, Matt Ridgway, was back in the States visiting when all this happened. And so their assistant commander's in charge, Anthony McAuliffe. The Germans send in a note, and the Germans are always civilized about war. They follow the rules of war, at least. So they send the note offering to the 101st Airborne in a very civilized manner, you are surrounded. You can't win this battle. You're not getting food supplies. You're not getting medical supplies. It's snowing, so no airplanes could even drop stuff into the 101st Airborne. And the civilized thing to do would be to surrender. The Germans would then take the prisoners of war to their POW camps. And the Germans were really quite civilized in their prisoner of war camps, unlike the Japanese. You got meals as best they could. You got heat. You were treated with a fair amount of respect in German prisoner of war camps. So logically, the Germans are saying it just makes sense for you to surrender. You can't win the battle, so there's no point in going on. Just surrender, and we'll take care of you. And the American commander, Anthony McAuliffe, this is just, it's hard to put into words. This is one of the epic moments of World War II. He just writes on the note the word nuts and sends it back. He's saying to the guy, you're nuts, you're crazy, we're never going to surrender. And I know that doesn't mean a whole lot in the vocabulary of 2020 students. We talk a lot more harsh these days. To call somebody nuts in 1944, them were fighting words. That would be like if you were surrounded today, and I'm just going to whisper this because it's not very nice. It would be like if that was going on today, you're totally surrounded, you have no hope of winning, and you write FO on that paper and send it back. And the Germans, of course, are furious and just start pounding the 101st even more. Their attitude, we're surrounded. No matter which way we shoot, we're going to hit Germans. And so they hold out throughout Christmas of 1944 and into January of 1945. Meanwhile, Eisenhower's back in the rear, meeting with his generals, trying to figure out what the heck to do when another epic moment of World War II happens. Patton's back in the game. We unleashed Patton after D-Day. Give him a brand new army of 300,000 guys to cruise across France and just slaughter Germans. Now, there's I guess a technical detail here that you got to understand to really get this. Being a general, 90% of the time is not fighting battles. Patton's got an army of 300,000 guys in motion. The laws of physics actually apply here. Once in motion, an object stays in motion. It's very difficult, even for an outside force, to counteract that motion. Patton's got 300,000 guys rolling straight east. He has to plan roads for these guys. He's got tanks. You can't just take a tank down any old road. Imagine having 300,000 guys with tanks in St. Genevieve, and you need to get to Farmington. There's Highway 32, and it's not going to cut 300,000 guys with tanks. The tanks are going to crumble the pavement. And if you try to use the side roads, they're gravel and they're difficult. So you have to plan all this stuff in advance. Those 300,000 guys need 3 meals a day. That's almost 1 million meals a day. They need water. You need gasoline. Generals spend most of their time planning this stuff. And once those plans are in motion, with this size of an army, 300,000 guys, it's almost impossible to stop that motion. So, Patton is sitting in this meeting with Eisenhower. Picture Eisenhower just puffing away on the cigarettes. Most of the time he's smiling. Not today. He is outright angry. He's about to lose the war. If we lose World War II, it's his fault. If the Americans are booted out of France, this could lead to a collapse of the alliance. The Russians might go their own way, sign a peace treaty with Germany. The English might go their own way and sign a peace treaty with Germany. Then we don't get any help against Japan. The whole world is crashing down on Eisenhower's head. And there's Patton in the room, throws his feet up on the table, lights a big fat cigar, and just sort of spouts off, "Don't worry about it, Ike. I'll be there in 3 days." The room goes silent. He's like that student that just says something so stupid in class that everybody is just deathly silent, and you could hear a pin drop, and you could see the blood boiling into Eisenhower's face. You could see the veins pounding in his bald forehead, and the anger is about to burst forth, because everybody knows that this is just an impossibility for Patton's army to turn and be there in 3 days ready for combat to save the 101st Airborne and save that Bulge. And so, picture it just like a classroom. When somebody says something stupid or they're whispering in the corner, the teacher says, "You mind to share that with the whole class?" So Eisenhower gives Patton a chance to explain himself. And he just pulls off this classically Patton thing. He basically says, "Well, several days ago, like last week, I was thinking to myself, if I was a crazy SOB like Hitler, and I was losing this war like Hitler is, what would I do? Well, I would concentrate my forces in the Ardennes, the Magic Christmas Tree Forest, where nobody expects me to attack from, and I'd hit the Americans right in the middle where they're weak and try to break that line and kick them right back out of France. Therefore, I started preparing for this a week ago." Patton's forces are already in motion to make a giant left turn. As Hitler pours more and more into that Bulge, Patton was prepared to make that left turn. If Bradley can just make the same left turn, I'm sure all of you can see, they can wrap up the German army, the best of everything Hitler has left, and destroy him at the Battle of the Bulge. And that's exactly how it goes down. It got colder, actually. It started to snow more, which actually helps Patton. It freezes the roads so his tanks can move even faster. On top of that, about the time Patton gets there and starts unleashing Patton's version of death upon the Germans, the snow went away. The clouds went away. The skies opened up to a beautiful blue sky. This is really bad for Hitler. This topic really deserves like its own whole day of World War II at least. We had bombers in England. By the end of World War II, we're flying the B-17 bomber, which is a 45,000-pound airplane with 4 massive engines that can carry 15,000 pounds of bombs. We could launch these things 4, 5, 6,000 airplanes at a time. So take 6,000 times 15,000 pounds of bombs, and we could send missions into Germany dropping millions upon millions of pounds of bombs. As soon as those clouds parted, the Germans had to have an oh crap moment. This is just one of those things that's really hard to describe. There's a B-17 that tours America now, and I was literally sitting here one summer in my basement just like this, reading my history books, and I heard thunder outside. And I could look over at my windows on the other side of the basement and see that it's light outside. There's no possible way that it's raining because I can see light outside. I thought, where in the world is this thunder coming from? And so I go out my back door over there, and the house is shaking by this point. It's so thunderous. It almost sounded like an earthquake, literally. I go outside, and lo and behold, above me is a B-17 Flying Fortress from World War II. Like, this is ridiculous. How can a flying fortress be over my house in the middle of summer? I went and looked it up online. It was touring the country and was touring in St. Louis, and I immediately threw Michael in the truck, and we go visit this B-17 up in Chesterfield. My point is, the engines are so thunderous that one B-17 bomber is shaking my house. Imagine the fear that must have coursed through the veins of the Germans when fleets of 1,000, 1,500, 2,000, 5,000 B-17s come roaring over the Battle of the Bulge, dropping their 15,000 each pounds of bomb payload upon the Germans, and all poo just breaks loose at the Battle of the Bulge, on top of Bradley and Patton wrapping the Germans up in their own little Battle of Cannae. This is pretty much it for the Germans. The Battle of the Bulge is Hitler's last punch. From there, it was just a race to Berlin. I've included that on the map to show you that when we race to Berlin, clearly the Russians are going to get there first because Berlin is on the Russian side of Germany. Hitler's army just falls apart. They were surrendering so quickly, we couldn't even deal with the prisoners. They were literally the guys that surrendered to us, and they were flocking to surrender to us because the Russians would just kill them. We literally could not process them or take their weapons. We just told them, keep marching west. Somebody will take care of you. So millions of German soldiers marching west, arms in hand. They're not going to do anything. They're just done. But there was nobody even there to take their surrender. Meanwhile, the Russians are closing in on Berlin, which is the last battle of the European War, the Battle of Berlin. And this is where Hitler realizes it's literally just over. Hitler has done everything he could to win the war. He's not a quitter. And so he gathers up his closest friends, his closest family. He's living in an underground bunker 6 stories under Berlin. I know it's really hard to see with glares, but he's got his little German Shepherd dog Blondie here with him in this picture, along with the one girlfriend that he had his entire life, Eva Braun. And they decide, at the last minute, he has refused to marry her throughout the whole process, because he considered Germany as his first love and his first wife. They decide that things have gotten so desperate that it's time to get married. They gather their friends up and their dog in their underground bunker in Berlin as the Russian shells are exploding over the top. They have a brief wedding ceremony. and then they retire to their private quarters where they poisoned the dog, and they each took doses of poison, and then they each shot themselves. Hitler knew the war was over. That was it. He has left orders for his private guards. He has his own private barrel, a 55-gallon barrel of diesel fuel. The guards are to take the bodies outside and use the diesel fuel, which burns extraordinarily hot, and destroy the bodies. He knew that if the Russians got a hold of their bodies, they would do horrifying things to Hitler and his wife if they captured even the bodies. They don't want to be captured alive, nor captured dead. The Russians would have cut their heads off and danced around with heads on poles and collected body parts and stuff like that. So he destroys the bodies. By the time the Russians get there, they were able to find a piece of femur and enough dental material to identify it as Adolf Hitler. The conspiracy theories that he escaped are just ridiculous. And the Russians had control of those artifacts until, secretly in control throughout the entire Cold War. So that's why there was never any public knowledge of Hitler's remains being kept by the Russians. And by May 1945, the Germans surrender. Which leaves us only to deal with the Japanese, and let's deal with the Japanese next week. Thank you, and goodbye. It's time for more rocking chairs and banjos.